What are the best rogue decks in Yu-Gi-Oh right now? I've comprised a tier list of some of the most popular rogue strategies, and I'll be grading them from first place all the way down to Arby's tier. Hey bro, if you like the meats, I'm not here to judge you, but that's the worst tier for this tier list. Of course, with so many awesome rogue strategies, I just can't simply get every single one, but if you let me know down below in the comment section what strategies that I'll miss, I'll do my best to get them into the next video. Without further ado, let's jump on in. So before we start talking about this tier list, I have to say, I hope your day phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. In this tier list, we are going to be determining how strong these strategies are off of a few traits. The first is how powerful are these strategies against some of the top decks in the game. Those top decks will be strategies like Labyrinth, Fire King, Rescue Ace, and of course, Snake Eyes. The next thing we're gonna have to figure out is how powerful are these against some of the most popular played cards. Super Polymerization, Drolling Logbird, Dimension Shifter! I think in order to be a very good rogue strategy, not only do you have to do well against some of the top decks, you also have to have a way to play around some of the most commonly cards or be able to use them into your favor. And of course, on this tier list, you may see some strategies that may be on the budget tier list as well, but one thing I want to point out is that we are not using the budget tier list scale, so they may be in a different tier. Let's go ahead and start off with Goatee, the strategy that got new support from Phantom Nightmare and can play Dimension Shifter. Ironically, I think Goatee is in a really good spot, but I'm gonna have to put it in good enough to steal W's. In my opinion, the deck is still not strong enough to be able to compete with the top dogs, but overall, this strategy is still incredibly strong, and the right player can win a ton of games with it. There are two different types of inboards with Salamangreat, a full combo that destroys, and a Nibiru token. Holy crap, everybody loves the Nibiru token, don't they? With new cards like Promethean Princess, Salamangreat actually has even more combos to unlock. And Nibiru is a so-so Yu-Gi-Oh card. I would have to say a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Now keep in mind, Salamangreat does lose to Dimension Shifter, but fortunately enough, the top decks in Yu-Gi-Oh don't play them. You're gonna have to worry about some other decks that are playing them. ABC. Now this is a deck that somebody did request on the budget tier list, but this deck ain't budget. Ironically enough, between all of the engines you have to cram inside of this deck to make it semi-competitive, it is a deck that's Arby's tier. ABC legitimately does not get better. It loses to cards like Drolling Logbird and really doesn't stand a chance against some of the strongest decks in the game. I think a card like Union Carrier may make the deck a lot stronger, but until then, it's just hopium and copium in a red solo cup. Now, Goblin Breaker was on our last tier list, but mandatorily, not sure if that's a word, we have to put it in the rogue tier list for Phantom Nightmare. I think that this deck is completely nuts, and mainly because there's so many different variants to play. Unfortunately, I don't think it has a leg up against some of the top decks, and can still fail to some cards like Droll and as well as Dimension Shifter, but overall, I think it's still powerful enough to keep up with some of the other rogue decks and being able to steal games against some of the top decks. One of the best things that this deck does have going for it is variance. Using the Gold Pride Punk version to be able to make ultra combos, or if you're using a Ghost Trick version to be able to spam out Utopic Draco Future. There's also the Shark combo, which I probably think is the strongest right now because it can attach your opponent's monsters. Oh, did I forget this deck is good at attaching your opponent's monsters? Konami is actively trying to make this a good deck, whether it's the ban list bringing off cards like Speedroid Terratop, or just giving the deck more support. I think that if you pick this as your rogue deck, it's going to be a very solid deck with potential to be able to compete. Chimera! Bro, I don't know about you, but I like Full Metal Alchemist. Look guys, can we all agree that Shao Tucker was a complete menace, just like how this deck is easily a top rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck? What Chimera does so good is play infinitely into the grind, and also having monsters like Mirror Jade to be able to rid your opponent's threats, but banish them instead of destroying them makes this a great deck. The new monster in Emissary of the Wax State is also insane. I think that Chimera has a ton of potential, especially with more illusion monsters come out. This deck will only get stronger and stronger. Go Dokers! Code Talkers are... Look, I'm not gonna waste anybody's time. They're Arby's tier. The only code that I want to talk to you about is a better deck if you decide this as your Cyber's deck. Unfortunately, this deck is incredibly power crept and not really worth it at this time. I would say it's mainly because Access Code Talker is not as strong as it used to be, which is kind of crazy of me saying Access Code Talker is not as strong as it used to be, but that's one of the biggest factors alongside of needing so much to be able to make its full board and to easily be stopped in this format. Moving on is Horus, a strategy that I did not know was a deck. Seriously, you normally see Horus in every other deck. Bystials, Orchist, anything you can see. I once seen a Horus Kashtira deck. How the f does that even work? But there are two new cards that Horus has. One is a field spell that makes the deck ultra consistent and allows them to draw the cards when they use their monster effect, the new Horus monster, which sends cards to the graveyard 2 times. One for its hand effect and the other one when it's summoned. Yeah, I think that there's actually a ton of potential with the Horus strategy as a pure deck. Being able to summon light and dark in his dragon can literally win game. This may be a little bit of hopium, but it's a new strategy. I think it's a solid choice. One thing that I will say about strategies that continue to get support from the main set is that they have the highest chance to be very good Yu-Gi-Oh decks, especially if they trend in the right direction, unlike decks like Warrock. I ain't mean to take a shot at Warrock. It's still rocking the house somewhere. Dark World, or as I should say,
welcome to the Dark World. We have cookies.
Unfortunately, they're oatmeal raisin. I'm gonna have to put Dark World into the Arby's tier. Look, my oatmeal raisin lover people, I am not saying that you're a serial killer, but just like playing this deck into the format, you're probably a serial killer for considering this deck. Droll, Dimension Shifter, odds are you're not even going to be able to perform that hand loop. What is the point of playing this deck right now? If you are on a budget and love Dark World, Dark World's good. If you are actually trying to use this deck to compete against the meta, God bless your soul. Dinos did not get new support from Phantom Nightmare, but the support in Maze of Millennia makes this deck a lot better. It gets a little bit more consistent traits, and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is still off the list, even though Misk is not. Free Misk. I think that Dinos in the TCG, even with Miscellaneous Saris at 1, is good enough to steal W's. You guys already know the name of the game for Dinos: activate Misk and pretty much go full combo. But even if you don't, using cards like True King Lethal Sagam to banish cards in your opponent's extra deck could be incredibly insane. This deck will struggle against back row decks like Rescue Ace and Labyrinth, but it will be really good against combo decks like Monadi. Speaking of combo decks, where you been, Dragons? Where have you been? There is a belief that since there are a ton of fire monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh, the Bystial monsters are trash, cheeks, doo-doo water. The only problem with that sentiment is that there are still very important dark monsters in the game, one of them being Diabellstar the Black Witch. No, seriously, Snake Eye Mommy is actually a really good card to hit, and I think a deck that is reliant on the Diabellstar engine or Diabellstar the Dark Witch itself, this deck can actually steal W's with. Keep in mind, Dragons are still a good deck. It may have lost a lot of resources like losing Chaos Space, but if you make this deck here for a good time and not a long time, you might have some good times. I think that Dragons can still be a pretty powerful deck, and being able to hit some of those important dark monsters is too strong. Next, we're gonna go ahead and talk about Galaxy Eyes. Galaxy Eyes your way into a Arby's tier list. Bro, what they be talking about at Arby's? Like the bacon cheddar or whatever? Yeah, that's this deck. Basically what I'm saying is that if you already are in this Hopium tier, this is one of the best decks available. Like the bacon cheddar right here. But if you already drink the Kool-Aid and go to a way better place like Church's Chicken or something, then you already know that this deck isn't amazing. And to help you realize that fact, I actually beat this deck with Time Lords. My guy. Do you know how down bad this deck is if you lose to Time Lords? Granted, guys, my one win does not mean that the deck is totally bad, but when it comes against competing against some of the top decks in the game, I would not recommend it. Next is gonna be Generator. Generate some more wins. I'm gonna put it in experimental. I don't think that Generator is a terrible deck by any stretch. It's pretty decent. I actually love that it can hand loop. And I know me saying hand loop and loving is normally not the thing. But what I don't like about generators is its inability to go second in this format right now. Maybe they need to switch it up. Maybe an invoked engine, or maybe even using the Revolution Synchron card. Maybe even Earthbounds may fix it, but right now, I wouldn't say it's it. By definition of Rogue, Voiceless Voice makes this tier list. Rogue? Underrepresented. The cast-offs, the defensive guys, us. I do expect Voiceless Voice to be out of this tier list by the next time we do it, but for right now, I'm gonna say that it is a top Rogue Yu-Gi-Oh strategy. If you picked up your Voiceless Voice lows, then you're doing pretty good. Finish building off the deck, it's pretty good. When Voiceless Voice gets going, not a lot of decks can stop it. And the best thing about it is that it plays around cards like Infinite Impermanence and Effect Veiler. If you're a really good player, you play around Droll and Lockbird really well too. I also want to take the time to point out that Saravis got expensive, my boys. So, your boy was right again about buy these cards before they skyrocket the price, but we ain't gonna talk about that, right? Saravis is an incredible card for that strategy. I don't say that it carries the deck, but it does a good job. Similar to how Master Hero Darklaw could carry you all the way to the top of Rogue when you're good enough to steal W's. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually loving Heroes a little more than every single one of these strategies on the good enough to steal W's list. And if I had to currently put these strategies in order, I think it may be like this, but these three are pretty close. Heroes not only have the ability to turn off most decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, but they also have Destiny Hero Plasma to shut down your opponent's monster effects. My only beef with Heroes is that it doesn't do as well against back row decks. Raidraptor! It is time for the rank up revenge. I was wrong about Raidraptor. You can see in my live duel that I did, but also you can see in the deck profile how powerful this deck is. Now, of course, you didn't get to see it with disruptions in the deck profile. You saw it with the live duel, and you can also see that this deck is fairly consistent and can play through a ton of interruptions. I also think that Raidraptor may leave this Rogue tier list. There is a possibility, but for right now, it's gonna be top of Rogue. One of my favorite things about this deck is ironically summoning Rising Rebellion Falcon on your opponent's turn, destroying all their monsters, but inflicting burn damage to win the game. It's one of the funnest things about this strategy that yes, you can play really powerful Xyz monsters, but you can also control the tempo of the game by summoning unaffected monsters, which is really hard for opponents to get rid of from the top decks. Think about it, guys. Rescue Ace struggles. Labyrinth, outside of Daruma Cannon, they'll struggle. Fire King, Snake Eyes, they'll struggle. Your monsters are unaffected. Well, Rising Rebellion is. That's all you need sometimes. Now, Synchron was another requested strategy. It's kind of crazy how this deck has fallen completely off the face of the earth post-Duelist Nexus. There were no hits for this strategy, but one thing that I will say is an uptick in hand traps, especially Droll and Lockbird, and rogue decks using Dimension Shifter. That's good enough to put it in experimental. This deck is not a bad deck if you don't get hit with every hand trap in the book. I think that it could be good, just don't get hit with hand traps. Kashtira has actually proven itself to be the comeback player of the year. Having its most important card in Kashtira Rise Heart Band does not stop this deck from being incredibly competitive. I'm gonna put it in top Rogue, and to be better, I'm gonna put it as the second best Rogue deck here. I think that top Rogue is pretty accurate, and those are the strengths of the decks from best to worst. Kashtira being able to recycle Fenrir, which is one of the most ridiculous cards in the game, insane. But what people really sleep on is Kashtira Unicorn being able to check your opponent's extra deck and this deck's ability to be able to play through hand traps. It's insane. Marine Cess is no longer the strongest Cybers deck. I think that belongs to Solomon Great, but does it still rank in solid choice? I would put it in good enough to steal W's. Being able to suffocate a lot of fire decks using their own World Sea Dragons Elantis, but locking themselves into water is pretty good. I also love that if you did pick this deck as a budget, it's good enough to steal against some of the top decks. Its weakness, going second, back row decks. Just about everything else doesn't really hurt Marine Cess as much. Red Dragon Archfiend it's experimental. Nothing really changes about Red Dragon Archfiend in this particular Yu-Gi-Oh format. This deck is pretty good. It gets better when we get Red Lotus. Day 27 of waiting for Red Lotus Konami. Hint, hint. And I think then a lot of people will be sleeping on Red Dragon Archfiend. It is a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck that only gets better with time. Therions. Okay, so the funny thing about Therions is that I said this deck is crazy good. Then I realized that this deck is still crazy good, but it's because of Visa Samsara, the one card combo, the one-stop shop. I still think that this deck is in the experimental category, and I think that it's a fairly powerful deck, maybe even stronger than experimental. The problem with this deck is that not enough people are testing it, improving it, and making it better. It's a great going second deck that does abuse the Horus cards, but now that I'm starting to look at it, may not be the best Horus deck. Horus may be the best one. Volcanics, guys, I want to issue a public apology. I did not have sexual relations with that girl. Nah, I'm just playing, dog. But seriously, Volcanics, Arby's tier. Hey, at least it can be used to heat the meats, right? Right? I really did say that Volcanics was an incredible deck. Unfortunately, I was wrong. It's a deck that's really good at destroying your opponent's boards and using the Horus engine, but I don't think it's even the best Horus deck. I don't even think it's the top 5 Horus decks, but it's a Horus deck. Volcanic Shell is one hell of a card. It'll have you thinking a lot of things. I think it's only sensible to put Vanquished Soul into a spot it deserves. Not only can this deck use Dimension Shifter, it also gains advantage from cards like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and Ghost Spell. Vanquished Soul has been a top rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck for so long, it's actually not top rogue anymore. I gotta put it in solid choice. My biggest gripe with Vanquished Soul right now is that it destroys monsters on the field. How could you do this to me, Vanquished Soul? Destroying cards on the field isn't as impactful as banishing them or getting rid of them in some way, and Vanquished Soul main method of getting rid of cards is to destroy them. That puts you at a disadvantage for decks like Fire King. But the good thing about this deck is that it can main Dimension Shifter and make cards like Abyss Dweller. It has an incredible grind game and can play around a lot of targeting interruptions. This deck is still a solid choice rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Orcus. So Orcus is actually good against playing around decks that use Troll and Lockbird. It's also pretty decent at protecting your cards or getting rid of threats without destroying them because of Dengirsu. It's a deck that can grind for almost infinite and can play against some of those good back row decks as well as the fire decks that can destroy your cards. Ironically, I think that this is a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It's kind of crazy how Harp Horror did make this deck viable. Normally that doesn't happen with Yu-Gi-Oh ban lists. The strategies go to the wayside, like spellbooks. You remember spellbooks? I've been receiving a lot of slack for my Magispector love, and I want to go on the podium and say, this is pure Magispector. Not none of that pendulum, splash this, put a rocket in it, destroy the deck by playing all these other cards, blah, blah, blah. This is pure Magispector.
The way God intended it to be.
Yeah, I think this deck is good enough to still W's. Because there are so many spell-reliant Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, being able to activate Secret Village of the Spellcasters could outright win you a game. Then there's the drawback, when your opponent realizes that they're just one big monster away from ruining you. Hey, free my dog Kieran, that helps a lot, Konami. I do think that Magispector is primed to get stronger, especially if we get Magispector Kieran off of the ban list. But for right now, I think it's a solid deck that's good enough to still W's. Yubel. Okay, look, guys. I'm going to put Yubel in a spot that Yubel players are not going to like me. I am going to put the spotlight on Yubel and say that it is a top rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck. This is the strongest deck in the game. As a matter of fact, it is the best rogue Yu-Gi-Oh deck of all time. Wait, what's that? The check didn't come in? So, like, I'm not getting paid. Oh, I gotta tell the truth then. Experimental. No, but in all seriousness, Yubel is actually pretty good. I think that when we get the new cards to help make the strategy even stronger, it will see its time. Right now, I've been seeing a lot of players experiment with a Chimera version, which is the real reason why I put it up here. But to be honest, I don't think it's better than other Chimera versions. Cosmo did actually get secret support with Psychic Arsenal and Psychic Processor. Now you know I was paid to say this. Chat keeps on trying to get me to play Cosmo, guys. Rescue me, because this deck is definitely the Arby's tier.
Put this deck in Arby's tier, cause it's bad. 2 cards won't save you from being good. Farm Girl is cute. Dark Destroyer does things, but it doesn't do enough.
Plus, there's no place like Kansas, right? Right? I think Phantom Knights are actually a worse version of Orcus, but still good enough to be competitive. Ironically, both of these decks do struggle against Dimension Shifter, meaning that it won't be better than some of the other rogue decks, but the good thing about them is that they can play forever, they use the Horus engine, and they can summon some really powerful monsters. Flame Swordsman will easily go into good enough to steal W's. I actually have a really good claim for Flame Swordsman. The deck is really good, but the Infernal Flame Swordsman, cheeks! Oh yeah, you guys are gonna hate SFI. So the reason why I think pure Flame Swordsman is way better than the Infernal version is simply because the Infernal version gives you more bricks with just one more interruption, where the pure version, you can play a ton of interruption cards to stop your opponent and cards like Super Polymerization, and you ain't gotta worry about bricks. Bro, this literally works smarter, not harder, my guy. A lot of times being able to summon Ultimate Flame Swordsman alongside of Phoenix Gearfried is enough, especially when you have a ton of disruptive cards. It's good enough to steal W's. Now, Brandon, my boy. Yeah, I'm kind of cheating. This should not be on the tier list. It's top row. Branded is one of the most devastating decks in Yu-Gi-Oh right now, and it's because it can play infinite. It isn't scared of Dimension Shifter. It isn't scared of Droll because it doesn't do enough to help those cards facilitate its destruction, but more importantly, it doesn't destroy, it banishes, and, like I said, plays forever. Boy, you can rash Blinded Fusion. Boy, you goofy, you think I'm losing. Pearly. All right, so this one's tough. The reason why I say it's tough is because a good Pearly player makes Pearly look incredible, but most Pearly players, they make it look experimental. The biggest question that I have to ask for Pearly players is why play this deck when you literally can play a easier deck to play and have more success? I do think you have to be an exceptional player. And then Scareclaw. You guys may argue with this, but I think Scareclaw is a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It is kind of crazy, and I made a deck profile to prove it. Scareclaw can play into the grind, doesn't play any fire cards, doesn't lose to Super Polymerization, but more importantly, is great at going second in breaking boards. It's a solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck that once you pick up and master, it can be incredible. Next is Centurion. This seems to be another deck that isn't hurt by Droll and Lockbird. Dimension Shifter can easily be played around and has an unfair one-card combo with win conditions. Yep, gotta be Arby's tier, right? Bro, I hate Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamities, but this deck does have more. What I've been noticing about Centurion players is that they've been using the Bestial monsters, and for good reason. You can summon Bestial monsters like Druisworm to your side of the field, and then synchro using Primera and Druisworm into a monster like Baron de Fleur or Chaos Angel. This then triggers the effect of your Druisworm and your Chaos Angel to be able to get rid of 2 cards on your opponent's turn, but also could protect all of your monsters or provide you an interruption. It's kind of ridiculous how Centurion players are evolving outside of the true King of All Calamities deck, and I actually like to see that type of stuff. Lastly is Unchained, and I gotta tell you, it's the hardest place to put it. Unchained feels like Pearly. When it was popular, everybody was playing it. It required a big brain and skill. Now, no one's playing it. It still requires a big brain and skill. There is a new level 6 Fiend monster in Phantom Nightmare that is support for Unchained. Yeah, I'm sorry guys, it's experimental. Ironically, the deck that wants to be destroyed, that actually could be a somewhat answer against Fire Kings, got nerfed on the last ban list, and I think that it may be better for you to just play a different deck. At least if you have the skill component down. And that's all that I have for the Rogue tier list post Phantom Nightmare. I want to know, what do you think? Did I rank something too high or too low? And also which strategies that I missed. Of course, big dog, I hope you are having an amazing day. Don't let anybody ruin it. And you can go ahead and check out these videos for more amazing content so I can catch you on the next one.